Now, speaking of the aviators, going back to the helicopters, chapter 9 in this book is called Brave Aviators, and it, again, these sitting ducks coming in is crazy to read about. Going back to the book, over the 20 months of air mobile training, a bond had been welded between the infantry and their rides, the Huey helicopter pilots and crewmen. Now the strength of that bond would be tested in the hottest of fires. If the air bridge failed, so meaning the helicopter's ability to get in there, if the air bridge failed, the embattled men of 1st Battalion, 7th Cav would certainly die in much the same way George Armstrong Custer's cavalrymen died at Little Bighorn, cut off, surrounded by numerically superior forces, overrun, and butchered to the last man. I asked Bruce Crandall's brave air crews of Alpha Company, the 229th Aviation Battalion, for the last measure of devotion, for service far beyond the limits of duty and mission, and they came through as I knew they would. And so again, you're basically asking these guys to get shot down every time they fly in, and this is interesting. Back to the book. This was early in the war, and the medevac commanders had decreed that their birds would not land in hot landing zones. In other words, that they would not go where they were needed when they were needed the most. Even before I asked, Bruce Crandall had already decided to begin doing everything that had to be done. Staying with it, Crandall now dropped his Huey loaded with casualties onto the red dirt strip. This is Crandall talking. When we hit the ground, we were met by medics and infantry troops still waiting to be lifted into X-ray. So that's another crazy thing to think about. You're unloading wounded men, and you're getting on that aircraft that's going to go pick up more wounded men, but you're going to stay. So the troops that aren't on the ground yet, think about what's going through their minds. They removed the dead, and you want to know what's going through their minds? I actually know what's going through their mind. They're going. Most of those guys are saying, "Get me in there as fast as you can." That's what they're saying. These are their brothers out there. Back to the book. They removed the dead and wounded from my bird, and this act is engraved in my mind deeper than any other experience in my 2 tours in Vietnam. A huge black enlisted man, clad only in shorts and boots, hands bigger than dinner plates, reached into my helicopter to pick up one of the dead white soldiers. He had tears streaming down his face, and he tenderly cradled that dead soldier to his chest as he walked slowly from the aircraft to the medical station. I never knew if the man he picked up was his buddy or not. I suspect not. His grief was for a fallen comrade and for the agony that violent death brings to those who witness it. More about the helicopters. Back to the book. One of the ships brought in Larry Litton, who immediately took over command of Delta Company from the wounded Sergeant Gonzalez. I told him to add the 4 Delta mortars to consolidate mortar positions set up by Captain Edwards and to control all 7 mortars from a single fire direction center. Principal direction of the fire was towards Alpha and Bravo companies, and the mortarmen would also have the mission of defending our 2 chopper landing zones from the east. And the reason I highlighted that is, even though I talk about decentralized command all the time, and Hal Moore starts off the book talking about how important decentralized command is, he's right now in that moment, he's centralizing command. He needs to get control of all the mortars so that they can use it correctly. So again, that's why it's the dichotomy of leadership, because there's times when most of the time you decentralize, but you can actually decentralize too much. And if you don't coordinate the efforts of these mortars, you're not going to use them effectively. So he centralizes the command of the mortars, brings them all into one location, and starts using them effectively. So that's a good note for leaders to remember.